history is dangerous. It's dangerous because it goes after our myths and our identities. And when somebody challenges those myths, which I now do routinely, people get upset about it.
Dave Bolger here, and welcome to Had I Known, a show that explores the journeys of some of the most interesting members of the Hamilton College community. This week's guest is Ty Seidule, Chamberlain Fellow and Visiting Professor of History. All right. Congratulations to the class of 2021. This episode is being released Sunday morning. Commencement was yesterday. So congratulations to all the graduates. That must have been one hell of a senior year. And if anyone listening wasn't able to attend the commencement ceremony or watch a live stream of it, you're in luck. This week's guest, Ty Seidule, gave the commencement address, and he was kind enough to join me for a conversation on Friday, less than 24 hours before he was to give that address. And what a conversation it was. For those that don't know, Ty is a retired U.S. Army Brigadier General, served in the Army for 3 decades. He is Professor Emeritus of History at West Point, where he was the chair of the History Department. He's an award-winning author, and his latest book, Robert E. Lee and Me, A Southerner's Reckoning with the Myth of the Lost Cause, is getting some much-deserved attention for what the New York Times calls a powerful and introspective look into white Americans' continuing romance with the Confederacy and the lasting damage that it has done. Ron Chernow, who wrote a book about somebody you may have heard of, says Ty Seidule scorches us with the truth and rivets us with a fierce sense of moral urgency. I can't think of a better book to enrich and invigorate our national discussion about race and memory and the troubled legacy of Robert E. Lee and the Confederacy. And we talk a lot about that in this conversation. His book and the message he's been spreading in conversations like this come at a very important time, obviously. I definitely learned a lot in this chat. And I really enjoyed the passion and the love that he's developed for Hamilton College in a very short time. And in a very short time, he's made an impact on the Hamilton community, and he doesn't take that lightly. This is a fun one. It's interesting. I hope you enjoy it. Here is my conversation with Ty Seidule. Hello, sir. Thank you for doing this.
Sure.
I know that you have a big day ahead of you tomorrow, so I appreciate sneaking this in.
Yeah, I'm very honored. It's a huge honor for me to do that to such a great school.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate you taking the time ahead of that.
Sure.
So first off, I've seen you talk before about your college radio experience, and this will air on Hamilton's radio station. So you're back on the air in college radio. So
cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I was also in high school. I got my back then you had to get a license, and I was licensed in Georgia. And I was on WKUN to the reactionary right of your AM dial, playing top 40 country. I would come on at 1:00 in the afternoon, right after Brother Larry, who was spitting hellfire and damnations in rural Georgia. And then I would play top 40 country. I was the only person in the station. And then at dusk, 5:30 in the winter, 8:30 in the summer, I would play the national anthem and shut the station down.
Wow.
Got paid $3 an hour.
Well, I, as a senior at Hamilton in the late 90s, I was working at WOUR in Utica, New York, playing classic rock, doing weekend overnights. And I was making $6 an hour. So the wages didn't improve all that much.
Yeah, not a lot of, maybe there's a few people that make money in radio, but not a lot of people.
No. So we mentioned the big day tomorrow. You are now famous for calling General Lee a traitor. At his tomb. Do you have words for Alexander Hamilton prepared for tomorrow?
Yes, he was a great soldier. He led a bayonet charge. How many, there are not many people. Yeah. So in fact, one of the things I'm saying is as a soldier and a military historian, there are things all over here named for soldiers and military stuff. It's all over the place. Steuben, Grant, the third buried there, the Elihu Root, the colors, the mascot. I mean, you name it. As a soldier, how can you not feel comfortable here?
And I don't know what your experience has been, but the general awareness of that and the military history of it all, I think, is lost on a lot of people, a lot of the students.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely true, that there is a whole bunch of things. But as somebody who, who was at both West Point and Washington Lee, what I found is much less problems. So what I love is the Whitman quote that is, that's on the old gym. There's a great Whitman quote there from Leaves of Grass that says sort of, we, America, you've been there for us, we'll be there for you, sort of thing. And so, there's a whole bunch of things. And I've studied the institutional history of West Point. So, and Morris Isserman is a good friend. I've taught with him last term, who's a historian of Hamilton College. So we love it here. It's a great community. And I'm just tickled to be a part of it.
And how did you come to arrive at Hamilton? Well, how did the fellowship?
Yeah, so I'm on a fellowship named after Joshua Chamberlain, the great hero of the 20th Maine, who was at the Battle of Gettysburg. And there was a fellowship named after Chamberlain that is to take recently retired Army or military officers with PhDs and send them to elite liberal arts schools. And so when I applied to this program, and a couple other schools were interested in me. And then I heard from David Whitman and Suzanne, who I knew previously at W&L. She was the dean at W&L before she was the dean here. And so I talked to her, and I talked to them. I came up for a visit, and my wife, in the middle of February during a snowstorm, and we were absolutely so impressed because I'd never seen so many happy people. It was right before the pandemic hit, but there were just people that were happy to be here, knew their job. I could also tell there were great leaders. There's great leadership here. I know good leaders when I see one. I don't think I've ever been to an organization that had better leadership than this one. And you can see that because we made it through this pandemic. And most schools either didn't have the courage to start, or they ended early, or they had huge numbers of COVID cases. And we did none of those. And so so we're really happy to be here. And I taught in person, masked up the whole time. Our students are as self-disciplined as any students I've ever been around in my life.
And that's someone who spent years at West Point. That's saying something.
Years at West Point, way more disciplined in a way, because they're self-disciplined. They are everything. I mean, people there making them do it. And listen, I love West Point. West Point is I spent 20 years there. I love it. In this pandemic situation, the Hamilton students just crushed it. They just did such a great job. And I just couldn't be prouder to be part of to be a Hamiltonian this year.
Huh, that's great. Did that discipline surprise you? Did you have a different expectation coming in?
I did, and I don't know why I did, but I did. And so I was one of many faculty members who were like, "They ain't never gonna make it. They're not gonna make it." I was filled with what's the right word for it? Just doubt. I doubted that they wouldn't have kegers. I doubted that they would wear the mask when they needed to. I doubted that they would socially distance. And boy, did they prove me wrong. Absolutely prove me wrong. As self-disciplined a group as I've ever seen.
And then in terms of the academics, anything surprise you, or what was your impression of the
well, I tell you, the first differences between Hamilton students and West Point cadets is Hamilton students get enough sleep. And that is the number one thing you need to work your brain is sleep first, food second. And they get both of those here. And I know that sounds strange, but at West Point, they don't get enough sleep. And that is, if you don't get enough sleep, you can't learn. So one, I was impressed that I had late afternoon classes. Nobody's fallen asleep. Two, this semester, they all wrote 20-page papers, crushed it, just did. And we never make, I've rarely made students write that much except for a thesis. So that they did great on that. And then we did, for my students this semester, we did panel presentations on Zoom to alumni. We had like 70, 80 alumni and parents and friends show up on Zoom to these talks our students this term wrote a paper on a Confederate monument, because that's what my subject is, on a Confederate monument that went up and then came down. They just did an amazing job on it. So yeah, I was really impressed with how well they did academically, as well as how well they did in the pandemic.
That's great. How does the approach to teaching and learning history at a military academy differ from liberal arts school? Does the focus on elements of history need to be different for a military cadet?
Well, I think there are two differences. The first is that here at Hamilton, another thing I like is there are no mandatory classes. So if I have somebody in my Civil War class or this Monuments and Myths class, it's because they want to be there. Because they didn't want to be there, they take the other course. At West Point, it's a large core curriculum, and that's also positive. It means everybody's got to take math and chemistry and physics and engineering and history and philosophy and law. That's great. That's one way of doing it. But it also means that I get students, the cadets, who may not want to be there. It's a mandatory class, so you got to bring it to make sure they see the value in it. So that's one thing. The sleep is another thing. As for the history, if I'm teaching military history, they understand. I mean, this is the history of their profession. Yeah. So here, I think it's important to understand military history because you're going to be a citizen paying taxes, and America is not a is not a militaristic nation. By that I mean we don't parade tanks down Fifth Avenue or Pennsylvania Avenue or anywhere like that. We don't have those kind of militaristic parades, but we're a warlike nation. By what that I mean, we go to war more often than any other country since the end of World War II. No country has gone to war more often than we are. So it is incumbent on on an electorate, on citizens to understand war and understand the military.
And I've heard you say in interviews before, which I had never considered it this way, and it really opened my mind to what influence citizens have on the military, is that the military doesn't change until the elected officials tells the military to change, and those elected officials are put there by the people. And I don't think people think about it that way.
No, in fact, so you think about the military, we represent America at its best, and that would be the United States Army, including 200,000 Black soldiers that destroyed slavery, freed 4 million men, women, and children from human enslavement, destroyed slavery, and saved the United States of America. And so, I am incredibly proud of what we did there. I've also been to the Holocaust Museum, where they have the what's it called, the battle flags of the United States Army divisions that liberated the Holocaust camps. But we're also the ones that were out on the plains killing indigenous populations there, the Native Americans. So, our Army and military represent the people the American people. And the reason we have the greatest military in the world is because we represent the greatest country in the world. And that's why, I'm so proud of the Army lately. I mean, it's only been 5 years since women could serve in all positions in the Army. 5 years. I mean, that's crazy. So, finally our elected officials said military, and we couldn't do it before that. It's law. And now it's open to everyone. 10 years ago, LGBTQ soldiers could not serve openly. They had to lie about it. It was a terrible period. Now they are able to serve in high, and I know general officers and people that work for me that are now serving honestly when before they couldn't. So yeah, it's important that people know that the United States military is a representation of the United States for good and ill.
And why is it, do you think, that there is a large portion of the country that feels like if you are critical of elements of the military that need to change, and some of the examples you've given, historically, any criticism on that is viewed as anti-American by some pockets of the country? And it feels like unless it's blind support and faith of the military, you're anti-American. But I imagine you wouldn't view it that way. Yeah,
I don't view it that way. Nobody gets a buy. Nobody gets a buy from history. Nobody gets a buy from accountability. And we need accountability. That's why we have journalists. That's why we have people holding the military accountable. And unless people hold us accountable, and our budget is like $720 billion a year. I mean, we spend 3 or 4% of gross domestic product on the military. We have to have people hold us accountable, and we have to be accountable to the values of the American people. And that's what we want, because we want to be represented. Because the other thing is a volunteer force. Unless you represent America, you're not going to get people to volunteer to be part of that military. And that we've got to do that. And that's our diversity in the military is one of our greatest strengths. The Army is one of the most diverse organizations in the country. Not that many people, many white Americans have never had a black boss. I've had a number of black bosses. I've had women as bosses, and now that's sort of changed now. That plenty of people have women as bosses, but the military can represent America like no other. But unless it's held accountable, it will not be the best it can be.
Yeah. And part of that now, as you mentioned before, is your focus on Confederate monuments, and you have been very outspoken about your personal history and evolution of your view of General Lee. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Sure, but you can't call him General Lee around me.
Oh, that's right.
You can only call him Colonel Lee because
that's right. There you go.
General of an insurrectionist force that fought to destroy the United States. So you can call him Lee, you can call him Colonel Lee. But General is reserved for those people who fought for a recognized country, and his wasn't.
Good point. There you go.
So yeah, I'm starting already, even before you ask the first question.
I love it. So you mentioned, I've seen you mention, I know in your book you talk about how he was a hero of yours growing up.
Yeah, well, I think that he was to go back to that old analogy from one of my favorite movies. This is Spinal Tap. Where the rock stars have an amplifier that goes to 11. My understanding of Lee as a child would have been on a scale of 10, he would have been an 11. And despite the fact I was raised a good Episcopalian, I was head acolyte for a number of years at the church I went to, I would have put Jesus in the 4, 5, 6 range. So it wasn't just that I thought highly of him. I revered him, and my culture revered him. He was the epitome of a Southern Christian gentleman. And it was that gentleman concept, that idea which came with status and with power, that I wanted to be like. I wanted to be a gentleman. I wanted to be a Virginia gentleman, which is a slightly higher caste than other Southern gentlemen. Virginia was the highest caste, at least growing up in Virginia. And so, and just some examples of that, whether it was a Confederate monument on Prince Street, in Alexandria, where I grew up, if it was the Lee house that he was raised in, that was a couple miles from my home, if it was Lee Road that was near me. In fact, amazingly, in my 6th grade year, I was bused across town when we finally started integration. I'm really a product of the integration era. When we finally forced integration, I was bused from the white elementary school, Douglas MacArthur Elementary, on a road named for a Confederate, to the segregated all-black school named Robert E. Lee Elementary School. So the segregated black school named after Lee, named in 1961 as a reaction to integration. So I really find both these things. One is that I have this huge, because of my culture, made him the greatest of the greatest general, the sort of demigod, beyond demigod. On the other hand, there's the real history, which told a different story.
How then was the fact that he was defeated portrayed? If he was held up to such high standards, how was that portrayed?
Yeah, well, and now, I would put the L on my forehead, for loser. But then, even though he was totally destroyed, his army he didn't just defeat it, he was destroyed. Every army was destroyed. And yet somehow he was the greatest general of the war. He was portrayed as the greatest general of the war. Well, I should have said, now, wait a minute. How is the greatest general in American history, which is what he became by the 1960s in America? How's the greatest general in America lose greater than any other American ever in our history? So, but yeah, it was revered as this great gentleman, this great warrior. So one example of that is and I talk about this in the book. I was born on July 3rd, and that's the day of Gettysburg, the 3rd day of Gettysburg, Pickett's Charge, where 12,500 Confederates are march a mile across open terrain to attack a force on a hilltop of U.S. forces, and they're slaughtered. I mean, it's a complete defeat, an utter defeat. And yet I learned that showed Lee's dignity, and he took responsibility. Not that he led a suicidal charge, that it causes utter defeat, but that he took responsibility for it. So every part of my early life led everything he did, made him a hero and this god, rather than what I think he truly is.
And at what point did that realization kick in? What changed your mind for you?
Well, a couple of things. First is, I graduated from Washington Lee University, so I got it full up there. I mean, that was more of that lost cause myth there. And then I went in the Army, and most people that want status in the South, and the white men that want status, become a doctor, lawyer, politician, businessman, investment banker, all those things. Well, I went in the Army, which is not a normal way of doing it. I took an ROTC scholarship because my Parents ran out of money. I had no money. So when 20 years in the Army changed my identity. That was one. So I became an Army officer, and then I became a historian. Those are two things that changed my identity. The third thing is I married someone who is the most honest person in the world. And my wife is so honest, and she recognized, like, why are you so aggressively Southern? That's just weird. And then the second one, she went in Lee Chapel and saw the altar of that chapel is actually Lee on the battlefield, recumbent on the altar. And she said, oh my God, get me out of here. This is the worst. So that's the first part of it, is my identity, my wife. The third part, I was at West Point as a historian, living on Lee Road in Lee housing area by Lee Gate. And then one day I walked to get some West Point swag for my family. And I go by our barracks. And our barracks are named after the greatest heroes in American military history. Eisenhower, World War II, Pershing, World War I, Grant, Civil War. Then I got to Lee Barracks. And I looked at the sign for that. And I went, why are there so many things here? There must be over a dozen things named after Lee. I ran around campus looking for all of them. So I went as a historian, I got to find the answer to that. I know how to do that. So think of this as from a Hamilton perspective, know thyself. I didn't know thyself, And so I went into the archives, and what I found was that in the 19th century, West Point banished Confederates from their collective memory. None in our cemetery, none on our great memorial, none on our big monument, none in our memorial hall. They were considered traitors. Treason was the reason that they weren't honored in the 19th century. I said, okay, well, then when did they come back? Back into the archives, 1930s, as a protest against integration. First Black cadets come to West Point in the 1930s. It's a protest against that. Early 1950s, that's when the Army integrates. It's a protest against that. 1970, when West Point is starting minority admissions and scores of Black cadets come instead of a handful, reaction to that. So I found it's a reaction to integration. And that didn't just change my mind. That put me on the warpath.
How hard was it to get people to accept that view?
Oh, very hard, because they grew up with these lies of the lost cause myth, that the war wasn't really about slavery, it was states' rights, or slavery wasn't that bad, or Grant was a butcher, or Reconstruction was a fail, all these lies that came with it. So they didn't know that one famous Robert Penn Warren, famous Civil War, famous American poet in the 1960s said, the Civil War is our felt history. We don't know it. We don't read it. We know it. And so I was upsetting their understanding of the war and upsetting their understanding of themselves, because history is dangerous. It's dangerous because it goes after our myths and our identities. And when somebody challenges those myths, which I now do routinely, people get upset about it. So yeah, I had a hell of a time trying to convince people about the facts, because the thing is that your stories trump facts. Culture trumps history. So the only way I could change this was to really tell my story.
And is that what led to the personal nature of the book? It's not just a historical textbook. It's truly a memoir that steeped in history.
That's exactly it. So, in another story, see, again, I can't give you an answer without telling you a story. Because that's the kind of historian I am. So it's 2010, something like that. I'm in chair of the memorialization room at West Point, and I come up with this idea. We have to recognize the graduates killed in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. West Point lost 100 killed. I mean, it's a huge loss for the community, and there's no one place to memorialize them. So I come up with this idea for a memorial room, and I get the money and I get the design and all that, but which name should go in? And in other words, from the War of 1812 is when we have our first at West Point, first killed, all the way through the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. But should those who fought for the Confederacy, who went to West Point and died fighting for the Confederacy, should they go in our memorial room? And I say no. They fought against their country. They killed U.S. Army soldiers. They renounced their oath for the worst possible reason, to create a slave republic. So I am right and righteous, and I give a brilliant argument. And just ask me, brilliant argument about why this shouldn't be true. And I lost completely. They voted to put the Confederacy in. They said, we want to bring people together. We don't want to be like the Sunni and the Shia, worst historical argument in the world. But that's what they said. So I go tail between my legs back to talk to my wife, again, the hero of my book, most honest person I've ever met, and say, Sherry, they wouldn't believe me. She knew right away. She said, hey, did you tell them about your story, about why you're so passionate about this? I said, of course not. One, no. Two, that's when historians talk about the facts. She said, well, Ty, if you really want to change people's mind, you got to bring your own story in there. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're exactly right. So I started doing that. And when I started doing that, I got a stronger reception because I used my story to tell this story rather than being a know-it-all historian. And that's when I started to have an effect. And that's really the genesis of the book.
And why is that? Is that because people can find their own personal connection to the story? They can see themselves in it more so than if it's just, hundreds of years ago.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. Remember that facts don't change people's minds. Storytelling does. And by using your own story, in fact, it's a way that Black activists have been able to change our narrative for years. And that it's just more effective because I can put me in there. They can see me and my change going through there. And the first time I gave this really was at my alma mater and at Washington University. And I was invited right after the violence in 2017 to go back there and give a speech called Robert E. Lee and Me. And that's the name that I gave it. And when I did this, they knew my views that I was, I was not a big fan of Lee, and I was clear on this lost cause myth that was in the DNA at Washington and Lee. And so I get up on the stage. Last time I've been on that stage was to get my commission, and framing me as this recumbent statue, this altar that looks like Lee, that is Lee, it's a worshipful place. It's a chapel dedicated to worshiping Lee. And I get up there over his grave. His grave is right below there. And I say that Lee chose treason to preserve slavery. That's my bumper sticker. Chose treason to preserve slavery. I had to tell my truth, but I was, as we say in the Army, nervous in the service because I got a funny last name. I was never I never had that status that I craved. So what was the reaction to that? They gave me a standing ovation. This white audience they were ready to hear it, but instead of they were ready for one of their own to say it, particularly somebody that had grown up like that. So I had many older men and women come up to me and say, yeah, Ty, I thought the same way. So I've had more effect by making myself vulnerable, by telling my story rather than being this know-it-all historian.
So I watched that speech. It's incredible. And I hope everyone who hears this watches it as well. As you come to this realization, the story you tell about the realization at West Point and digging into this, was there a personal struggle of coming to terms with that?
There was early, but my wife really helped me out because she said, she's so honest. She says, what can go wrong if you're honest? Mm-hmm. What can go wrong? So it started out that I was nervous about doing this, particularly the first couple of times I gave it. But then it was like, now, converts have the most zeal. So as a convert, I'm proselytized. I mean, the book in some ways is a polemic. It's a memoir using the skills of a historian to tell a story, my story, which sort of wraps the story of America, and particularly the history of race, around that. So I was nervous at first, and now you can't shut me up because again, it's converts are the most zeal, and I'm a convert, and so I love my country. I love the military. It's been great to me, and I want our nation to be as good as it can. But as James Baldwin, one of my great heroes, wrote, I love America more than any other country in this world, and exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually. So, but I can't criticize America without criticizing myself first. And if I can criticize myself and the way again, it goes back to Hamilton's motto: "Know thyself." I did not know thyself. And that's why it takes lifelong learning to do that. And I think the historian skills that I had over a lifetime really helped me to figure out how to know thyself. And it's one of the reasons I love being at Hamilton is because that motto really speaks deeply to me and to the changes that occurred to me, both intellectually and morally, as I changed my worldview.
And as a convert with the most zeal now, I am sure it attracts attention and attracts potential rebuttal. And I'm being kind. What kind of attacks do you get when you start spreading this message?
Well, as I talk, history is dangerous. It goes after people's myths and identities, and when you do that, people react. About 6 years ago, I did a video. Again, I got to tell a story to do this, but about 6 years ago, I did a video for PragerU, which is a very conservative website.
The Civil War. The Civil War was about slavery.
Yeah. Civil War was about slavery, and I said the citizens of the Southern states went to war to protect and expand the institution of slavery. I mean, it's very clear. I was in my blue uniform, and as you can tell about me, I'm a former armor officer, cavalry, tanks, and we have one way, and that's straight ahead. I punch it in the nose. I write like that, and I talk like that. So I punched in the nose, saying the Civil War was about slavery, and it went viral. And the Army colonels, like colonel at the time, just aren't supposed to be viral. And so, I mean, it's since it had 5 million views the first week, it's up to 35 million now. And from that, I got hundreds and hundreds of emails to my personal West Point email address, because it was an open email address, including actual death threats, using language. I mean, I'm a soldier. I understand profanity, but this profanity made me blush. And so, I got a lot then, and hundreds of thousands of negative comments. For the book, it's been less. So I have whether it's Hamilton or my website, I have an emails that you can send me stuff. And there it's been 20, 30 to 1 positive, much more positive now than it was in 2015. So I take heart in that. Now I still get it. And plenty of 1-star reviews on Amazon, which I do usually, I don't think I did it this week, but many Tuesdays, I'll do Tuesday troll on Twitter, and I'll post one of those negative 1-star reviews. Sidule's book is not worth it. It's not even worth being cat litter. I want my money back, or I've been called the woke general. So I get lots of people that call me names, but I mean, really, it's water off a turtle's back. There are some people that if you don't like me, that's okay. You don't have to like me. The fact that everybody does not have to like me, as long as I'm telling my truth.
Was the fact that that video went viral, forgetting that it was you who went viral, but just the idea that notion of saying to camera the Civil War was about slavery, was it surprising to you that caught fire the way it did? That
totally surprised me. Yeah. I mean, this is 99.999% of American historians. You say, what was the cause of the Civil War? They said, well, read the secession declarations from all the Southern states. They proudly say it's that. Read the Vice President of the Confederacy, Alexander Stephens, says slavery is a cornerstone of our new republic. So yes, I mean, but the culture, the culture is not caught up to the history. We still think of the Civil War. I think, again, 5 years has come a long way. Things in America change very slowly until they change fast. But in many ways, we still have the Gone with the Wind idea of the Civil War, and that the Civil War wasn't about slavery. Well, that's just not true. Again, you have to believe me, the white Southerners who seceded said they were doing it to protect slavery. So, but it completely caught me by surprise, took the Army by surprise. It took everybody by surprise. And in fact, nobody liked it. I got the Stars and Stripes said I was too close to a political organization. Was I really doing political speech? The Army wondered if I was doing political speech by saying the Civil War is about slavery. The Nation, which is a left-leaning magazine, said I was a propagandist for the Army. So I did not. I mean, I had no idea. I had not been a public person before that. And then after that, but of course, the Army said you're not allowed to talk to the press about this at all. And so it was, I understood that again, that's where I come back to. History is dangerous. And that's one of the reasons I love it so much, is because you can't understand. There's no way to understand where we want to go until we know where we've been. And so I think that history is that foundation, whether it's personally or if it's your community or if it's your nation. That's how we understand ourselves and our world, is by understanding where we were.
Yeah. I had a history professor at Hamilton. He's no longer there, who I think almost had an aneurysm one day in class when someone said the Civil War was fought over slavery, and he pounded his fist on the table saying it was about states' rights and had that argument. Now, I'm not going to sit here and call the guy a racist, but I don't think that's where he's coming from. But is the attempt at a credible argument, or to make that argument, a view of, well, it was a different time, and is it essentially an apologist's view of what our history is? Like, what? I mean, or is it as simple as anyone who makes that argument is a racist and we're just kidding ourselves? Like,
the thing is that we went through historical narratives, the historiography, what historians have written about, said for years, there's a whole school of thought that it wasn't about slavery, that they when it's an economic argument, or it's a states' rights argument, or it's a abolitionist cause, or all these things. But if you scratch the veneer of any of those arguments, slavery's underneath it.
The root of all of it is slavery.
The root of all. So states' rights to have slaves. The other reason that states' rights is a problem is that Southerners had no problem abusing the states' rights of New Yorkers. So New Yorkers said, hey, you can't bring your slaves to Long Island. You can't bring them to the Hamptons. You can't bring them to Manhattan. And they were going, no, of course you can. We can totally do that. You don't have the states' rights to tell us where we can and can't take our slaves. But the idea of their own states' rights was like sacrosanct. So yeah, it's the states' rights to have slaves. So no, I don't. I'm sure there's still people that argue that, but then they grew up with that historiography as well in their graduate school programs. Yeah. But I don't think you can go to a college in America today and hear that. I don't think you can, and not say, okay, maybe yes, there's an economic argument, slaves. Right. But the idea that it's tariffs or that it's all these, and this is what Gone with the Wind does, which I write about. It's like this defense of freedom or this, it's all just subject. I grew up in the South, and what I like to equate it to is kudzu. If you've ever been in the South, kudzu is this plant that grows over everything, imported from China, grows 18 inches a day, takes over telephone poles, will grow across the road if you don't drive across. And that's what this lost cause myth, this idea of Southern chivalry, of these lies of the lost cause, it chokes out all other narratives. And what I'm hoping is that we can get away from that narrative to allow other stories to come, whether it's the abolitionists or the enslaved stories or the civil rights stories. All of these can come out if we cut back this kudzu of the lost cause and white Southern narratives.
Mm. And then ultimately, as I understand it, it was essentially states' rights that allowed all these Confederate monuments and military bases to be named after Confederate soldiers, because it was the states who had the control to name them.
Well, that's true. Well, it's for the Confederate monuments in the South. Remember that those come. There's something called the Redeemer government. So all the language is really coded, but Redeemer in this case means that the white supremacists, through violent terror, are able to take back control after Reconstruction. So by the 1890s to 1910, all the Southern states redo their constitutions to create constitutions that exclude Black people from the vote. Remember, Mississippi has more Black citizens than white, so they redo the constitutions, and they say, Virginia says, we're doing this to exclude Black people from the vote. So and they use racial violence to enforce that. So if you think about it, the idea of Black disenfranchisement, white terror through the KKK and other organizations of lynching, Jim Crow segregation that comes in the 1890s, and then Confederate monuments are all pillars of a white supremacist society to ensure white political power at the expense of Black people. And when the bases are named, they're named in World War I and World War II, but by that time, there's both this narrative, sort of a reconciliation that white America, North and South, is coming together, and we're going to at the expense of the equality of Black people. And so the Army names these in World War I and World War II at a time when the Army is segregationist, so a white supremacist organization on its own. So so it's an ugly story about why we get to these, and one that we need to shine the bright light of history onto.
So as we look to start to change for names of bases, for example, you've been outspoken on who we should change them to, and so give me some of the names of war heroes and military heroes that we should be thinking about that we're not.
Well, I don't think I'm going to do that, and the reason I'm not going to do this, I am on this commission to change the base name, so I'm on that, and it'd be inappropriate for me to talk about that now.
Got it.
So there is the National Defense Authorization Act created a national commission, which has got a name about 40 words long, but basically it was called the Naming Commission that's going to look at these issues. And I'm one of the 4 members appointed by the Secretary of Defense, and there are 4 others by Congress. So I'm the vice chair of that commission. I'm incredibly proud to serve with my fellow commissioners to try to help on a subject that I've been writing about for years, but I really can't say much about that.
Got it. Well, I grew up with hearing my dad talk incessantly about Audie Murphy, so I'm going to put in a plug for Audie Murphy.
and Audie Murphy, in fact, there's a hospital named for him in San Antonio, and of course, the great hero, 3rd Infantry Division, Rock of the Marne, who manned a burning tank, or I don't know if it was and I can't remember what it was. I think it was a tank, and on his own stopped a German battalion's attack, killed I don't know how many Germans. I mean, he's the most decorated soldier of the war, and of course went on to a great Hollywood career after that. Interestingly, also suffered from post-traumatic stress terribly, and the rumor about him was that he slept with a loaded .45 caliber pistol under his pillow. So, but a great hero, and but this is an amazing thing. There's so many great American heroes that represent who we are as a nation, represents our values today. Remember that there's a difference between commemoration and history. So we're still going to talk about the Battle of Chancellorsville at West Point, or in the Civil War class that I taught in the fall. We talked about the Battle of Chancellorsville, and Lee won, and Hooker still got his butt kicked. That's not going to change. But who we commemorate represents our values, and that changes over time. And the values that we have today are those who fought for the United States of America, not those who fought against it.
You just mentioned with Audie Murphy, PTSD. So much is being made in culture now, removing the stigma around mental health. And there's so much more attention being placed on it. I know it's a big topic on campus at Hamilton and the mental health of the students. What's that like for the military? How is the military taking a different approach to that these days?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think when I was first came in the military, you could not go see a therapist. You couldn't get mental health counseling without it affecting your security clearance. So they would ask, have you ever sought mental health counseling? And if you said yes, there was a chance, it certainly felt that way, that you would lose your security clearance. And if you lost your security clearance, you couldn't serve anymore. So there was a huge stigma against that. And so because of that, many people dealt with their mental health issues the old fashioned way, which is alcohol or drugs. Yeah. And now we're much better. I mean, I told I have no problem. I told people when I was in command at various levels, hey, yeah, I go get counseling. Of course I do. Man, I get a regular checkup because that's what professionals do when they want to make sure they're fine. So the Army is much better about that. The counseling services are there, just like they are at Hamilton, to ensure that we're looking at mental health as a both preventative and if you need to go get as I always say, just get a checkup. It's the same way you do a physical checkup. So yeah, it's much better about that. Now, people still have problems, but on the other hand, we should also remember that just because either you have seen mental health counseling or you have had problems doesn't mean that you're not going to be a great citizen, whether it's at Hamilton or in the military. And many people do. They go get mental health assistance and they serve with great distinction. So yeah, I'm really proud of how the military has really done a 180 of this. And I give one of the credit to is a General Carter Ham, who retired as a 4-star general and went on record saying, yeah, I came back from this last deployment. I got some post-traumatic stress. I went and got help for it, and it's really helped me. And when he did that as like a 3 or 4-star, it really allowed others to do that. So I would always say that when I was leading soldiers, to say, listen, yeah, I do, of course so. And I want you to go do it as well. So I'm proud that the military, it's not perfect. We still have a ways to go, but we're doing much better.
That's great. It seems like the removing the stigma attached to it is such a critical step, and speaking out and people standing up and saying, it's something that I deal with, I think is a major step to do that.
Well, leaders have to lead from the front. You have to lead from the front. You have to, if you want people to do something, you've got to do it yourself. So I was just thinking about this so we went and did the rehearsal yesterday for the commencement here. And I'm there following Dean Suzanne Keene, who is one of the finest leaders I've ever worked with in my career. And so I'm wondering, do I wear a mask or do I not wear a mask? Well, the rules are we're going inside in a large place with not many people. We had like 20 people in this huge place. And I said, hey, Suzanne, what's the deal? She said, well, the rules are we don't wear it. So I said, now you can wear it if you want to, Ty, but I'm not going to wear it. I said, I'm following you, boss. You're not wearing it. I'm not wearing it because I want to model the right behavior. And so I took mine off, and there are people that are uncomfortable by saying, hey, the boss is doing this. That means because we're all vaccinated. By the way, another thing, I'm vaccinated. Got it as soon as I could because I was teaching in person. I got it really early. And, our leaders did the same thing here at Hamilton. They got vaccinated because, when they could. They didn't get to the head of the line.
Right.
They did it when they were allowed to do it. So, yeah, I mean, that leaders model correct behavior.
Give me some other qualities of a good leader. You mentioned early on, you know good leadership when you see it. What do you
I
see?
do. Well, I see here at Hamilton is, first of all, it helps to be smart. Being smart helps. And I mean, both of our leaders here are really smart. The second thing is that it takes real planning. I mean, you kind of really plan particularly something like a pandemic, and you've got to figure out how to get the resources. You got to get your teammates involved. So I'm just thinking about the way David Whitman got the board of trustees involved and said, listen, whatever this takes, and probably talk to Karen Leach, who does the budgeting stuff, and said, listen, Karen, we're going to we're going to do whatever it takes to keep Hamilton safe. You let me worry about finding all the money. We're going to do this. And the other one is to have the courage, which he did, to say, we can do this and we can stay open. And guess what? We did. There were so many other schools that either didn't test enough and got in huge problems, or shut down completely and lost a year. I mean, it sounds like they lost a year, but there's, the part of the great experience of a residential college like Hamilton is being here.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that is the friends you make on the dorms, the friends you make. And the seniors here had that.
Yeah.
What a gift that has been. Now, they earned it through their behavior, but it took leadership to make sure that, we tested 3 times, students tested 3 times a week. I tested twice a week. Whether it was food or, Homewood Suites or all the other stuff. So I can tell military history leadership to the end, but coming up with a good plan, having good judgment, executing that plan, even when others are telling you that, no, you can't, the courage to do that. And then everything that went on. So I'm just so excited and happy that I could see the leadership here at Hamilton. Listen, I'm sold, brother. I'm sold.
That's awesome.
I'm sold. It's a great school. And the people that are graduating this year should be extraordinarily proud to have gone to such a fine school.
So we got to get you to stick around then.
Oh, well, I'm certainly going to be here next year and teaching World War I and World War II in the fall. It's going to be with a first year course. Going to be fantastic. So and we're and then happy to be part of this community when we're not, because that's part of the great thing about this residential college is that the community is so strong. And so I'm looking forward to having coffee with people and having lunch with people. And, because that's the other way that you create community is by breaking bread together and by having coffee together and talking about ways of talking about in this community of learning. And I love this community of learning that we can do that. But next year, man, I'm going to be having lunch out with people every day. So you have to come from Boston here.
I will.
And we're going to have lunch or have a cup of coffee.
I'm going to take you up on that. So I ask everybody, looking back across your career and your journey, is there anything you wish you had known sitting here today?
Well, yes. Good gracious. I wish I had known about the lost cause. I wish I'd known this history much, much younger in my life. I wish I had the Civil War course that Hamilton College kids are taking, not the ones that I took. So there's a ton of things I wish, but the other thing about, and I think this is true, something that Hamilton College kids are learning today is wrong. I don't know what it is. We didn't do it on purpose. But something in 30 years, they're going to look back on and say, could you believe Seidule taught me that? What a numbskull. What a numbskull. So just like you said, there's something you learn that is wrong. So I think, yes, there was plenty that I learned, but one of the things that a liberal arts education, particularly a good one you get at Hamilton is that you understand that lifelong learning is the prerequisite to a life of meaning. It's prerequisite to a life of change. And it's the only way to know thyself.
Well, you stuck the landing on that one.
Thank you very much. Even the Bulgarian judge gave me a 10 out of 10 on that.
All right, that's Ty Seidule. That message at the end there is the key theme that he ended up delivering the next day during his commencement address. If you want to check out that address and check out the entire commencement, put the link in the show notes. Also in the show notes will be a link to get his book, Robert E. Lee and Me, A Southerner's Reckoning with the Myth of the Lost Cause. We'll also put a link to the speech he references that he gave at his alma mater, Washington and Lee. Highly recommend you check that out. My thanks to Ty Seidule for joining this week. It was an incredible honor to get a chance to talk to him. And hey, I hope I get to see you Wednesday At 5 p.m. Eastern, we're going to be doing Had I Known Live with Gillian Zucker, class of 1990, who is the president of business operations for the LA Clippers. So I have Ty recording a conversation with me right before he's about to give a big speech. And now we're going to have Gillian taking time to chat with us while her team is in the middle of the playoffs. I don't know why these people keep agreeing to do these things with me. But come join us. It's going to be fun. We're going to be talking about sports. Hit up the link in the show notes for that one. And as you've probably heard me say before, this will be your chance to do this gig better than me. Right? So if you think I'm better than him, I can ask a better question. Now you can. Come join us on Wednesday and ask a better question. You have been listening to Had I Known on WHCL-FM, Clinton, New York. HadIKnown.buzzsprout.com. Had I Known Show on social media. As always, my thanks to Dr. Michael Woods for supplying the music on the show. And once again, Doc is going to play us out. Hope you enjoyed the show. I'll see you Wednesday, and we'll talk to you next week.
Podcast show on your radio or take it to go.